We welcome you all for our Medica CardioTalks. Today we are in Medica CardioTalks Series 6. I have with me my colleague, a very accomplished interventional cardiologist and electrophysiologist, Dr. Dilip Kumar. Today we are going to discuss 3 trials, and the first of those 3 trials is RIVER trial. Dr. Kumar, what do you think about this RIVER trial? Apparently, we are familiar that the newer anticoagulant, oral anticoagulant like NOACs, are contraindicated in valvular heart disease, like mitral valve disease. But RIVER trial has taken us completely to a different area. I would like to have, even our audience would like to have your opinion about this newly published RIVER trial.
In fact, this is the first time this group of patients have been studied, where NOAC has been compared with warfarin, and it was mitral valve replacement patients with bioprosthetic valve, and all the patients had atrial fibrillation, and one arm got rivaroxaban, and second arm got warfarin, and they set out to see the non-inferiority, and what they met, the primary endpoints were met. In fact, the average time from the randomization to the occurrence of primary events were 7.5 days longer in rivaroxaban arm.
Oh.
And the bleeding were less. It was 1.4 versus 2.6%.
That is interesting.
Yeah, and that is the hazard ratio 0.56.
Which essentially means it is significant.
Yeah, the bleeding risk reduction is significant, but the primary endpoints, it was the non-inferiority was met, and there was no superiority which was found.
But even then, if you take both the points together, I'm sure the rivaroxaban, because we the clinicians are quite comfortable because we need not monitor sort of prothrombin time and INR on regular basis.
Correct, sir. And we want to stay away from warfarin. So much of unpredictability, then labile INRs, and then many drug interaction, then food interaction. So better to avoid warfarin, and this is I think it's a positive step in direction of managing these patients.
Especially in valvular heart disease. Right. But then, as you said very rightly, that the rivaroxaban has actually created a kind of revolution in clinical usage of newer anticoagulant in valvular heart disease, like mitral valve disease with mitral valve prosthesis. But I'm sure this must be biological prosthesis.
These all were bioprosthetic valves.
And patient had atrial fibrillation. Like, what kind of dosage was used in this group of patients?
The normal what was used in other atrial fibrillation trials was 20 milligram of rivaroxaban was used, and those patients who had lesser GFR than 15 milligram was used.
And what were the kind of the overall score, or what kind of the results of the in the high risk group of patients?
Yeah, basically the patients, the patients who were enrolled, the mean CHA2DS2-VASc was kind of 2.6. So they were not very highly, thrombotic risk patients, but still 2.6 is a moderately,
correct,
high thrombotic risk patients.
Yes. So obviously, as we may understand, that in a moderately high risk group of patients of valvular heart disease with prosthetic mitral valve, biological prosthesis, patients with atrial fibrillation in mitral valve disease, rivaroxaban has shown less bleeding, but equally non-inferior as compared to warfarin to meet the primary endpoint, right? So what would be your take-home message for our viewers?
Take-home is this is a very initiative, very good initiative, and we were looking for these options, but definitely it's still a contraindication for mechanical prosthetic valves. So this is my message. It is evaluated only in bioprosthetic valves, and maybe we are still under evolving phase of this kind of therapy in this group of patients.
Correct.
So it's not time to jump the gun. So we'll wait for further evidence, but it's a very good initiative.
But we do not have any data in rheumatic mitral valve disease. As you know that in India or even in this kind of developing world, there are a lot of rheumatic mitral valve disease. What are your thoughts about this?
Yeah. Mild mitral stenosis we can still use in atrial fibrillation patients, but beyond that, it's contraindicated.
We have to wait for a while. So it's good to know that things are changing, as you know that medicine is dynamic. Clinical practice of medicine in cardiology is much more dynamic. And today, from the RIVER trial, we came to know that rivaroxaban, a newer oral anticoagulants, is extremely helpful in patients of mitral valve prosthesis with biological prosthesis and atrial fibrillation to meet the primary endpoint of atrial fibrillation in a moderately high risk individual of CHA2DS score more than 2 or 2.6, those are 20 milligram of rivaroxaban, patients may be benefited, and clearly we need not have the hazards of warfarin like interaction with many drugs, foods, and regular monitoring of prothrombin time and INR. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Kumar. With that, we move to the second trial, and that is it's much more interesting. As we know that patients of diabetic kidney disease is a big challenge for us, for the nephrologist, for the cardiologist, and a huge number of internists as well as critical care physicians. Today we have information from FIO-DELIO DKD trial, and that takes us a completely different area where we feel as a physician it may be safe to use some drugs and some in patients of diabetic kidney disease. Again, Dr. Dilip Kumar is going to talk to us on FIO-DELIO DKD trial.
Yes, sir. This is a very interesting trial, in fact, and we have two MRAs, mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, which are in market and which have quite a robust evidence in reduction of mortality in heart failure trials. But this is a third MRA which is now showing much of promise. And why a third MRA? Basically, the fact is this is a pure non-steroidal mineralocorticoid.
Which essentially means that the spironolactone or even eplerenone, they did not have this kind of the special feature.
Definitely.
Unlike this new drug.
Yeah, the spironolactone was non-selective, and this is selective, but still has the eplerenone has got some steroidal, activity, effect. But finerenone is pure non-steroidal mineralocorticoid receptor antagonist. And from where the idea came was from animal trials. It was shown that it has a very potent anti-inflammatory, and it acts wonderful on cardiac fibrosis. It prevents cardiac fibrosis.
Oh, right.
And that's why they thought it can be evaluated in renal endpoints and cardiovascular endpoints. And that is why two large trials were started. One was FIO-DELIO DKD and second was FABERO.
All right.
FIO-DELIO just we got result. FABERO we are expecting next year, and it showed that again. When we use finerenone, there is 96%, 40% reduction rather, 40% reduction in renal composite endpoints.
Which essentially means that these patients with diabetic kidney disease is a very sort of as you know, that diabetic kidney disease is progressively increasing in our clinical practice and is a significant type of morbidity of patients having atherosclerotic heart disease, hypertension, along with diabetes, long-standing diabetes. So I'm sure that they will be benefited. So what would be your further thought about this particular trial? In addition to reduction of cardiac fibrosis and vascular inflammation, any other advantage of this particular drug?
Correct, sir. This has shown benefit in reducing the renal composite endpoints, but how far it is going to help us in reduction of cardiovascular endpoints, it's a matter to debate and to see in future, because only 7% of the patients in this trial were having heart failure. So we can't judge and we can't make any conclusion regarding that.
We need to have more number of enrollment.
And then we need to see these heart failure patients, how they behave. But right at the moment, we are looking at renal endpoints, and we have got 2-3 very important and very pleasing developments in last 2-3 years. And one is the SGLT2 inhibitors. We have evidence with both TAPA and EMPA that renal deterioration is hampered and stopped or retarded with this.
Correct, because that is a problem that we are facing at the moment.
In addition, this molecule may add and may prolong renal deterioration. So this is going to be a thing to watch in future.
Right. So I'm sure that do you think that in addition to us being cardiologists, clinicians like nephrologists would also be happy to take this drug in their practice?
I think they will be more excited about this drug.
So in those two trials, do you think there is a nephrology input?
Yeah, I think definitely there was nephrology inputs, and it is much discussed in nephrology meetings more than cardiac meetings.
Excellent, very nice.
Definitely, if something happens in diabetes patients, we all are involved as cardiologists as well as nephrologists and
even probably diabetologists, endocrinologists. So I'm sure that this new drug is finerenone is a newer generation of mineralocorticoid, which has got a very specific effect to slow down the progress of diabetic kidney disease. And therefore, the cardiologist, nephrologist, and all the endocrinologists, especially the people having practicing diabetes mellitus like internist as well as critical care team, would be extremely happy to know that this new molecule would be a great blessings for patients of diabetic kidney disease.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And now we move to the third trial, which is known as Rhapsody trial. And Rhapsody trial basically a different sort of drug. As we know that in inflammatory process, interleukin has got phenomenal role, especially nowadays when the entire world, the people are talking a lot about COVID, and they said that COVID is primarily a cytokine disaster because the interleukins are progressively getting stimulated by this COVID-19. So interleukin has been found and has been known to be responsible for inflammatory reaction, be it in acute, subacute or chronic. There's a drug which is called rilonacept drug has been found to be interleukin-1 inhibitors. People found that this particular drug has profound effect of inflammation of pericardium in our cardiology practice. Dr. Kumar is going to talk to us on this new drug and its role in cardiology, especially in context or in relation to pericardium. Dr. Kumar.
Yes, sir. And rilonacept is as you said, it's an interleukin-1 inhibitor, and there are a group of patients like who are having recurrent pericarditis, and these are very difficult to manage.
Absolutely.
We initially, give as per guidelines and recommendations, NSAIDs which require in very high doses to regulate, and then we give colchicine, and then finally we switch the patient to steroids.
And many patients, finally we get frustrated. Patients got frustrated, and they think they need a surgical intervention.
Yes. And this particular drug has reduced after the initial, benefit with response with NSAIDs and colchicine. If we put this patient on rilonacept, yes, as they did in this particular trial, they got 96% reduction.
Oh, excellent!
As compared to placebo.
The question is that did they measure the interleukin-1? So did they monitor the interleukin-1 level?
No, that was this was the clinical endpoint driven study, and they did not measure the interleukins. But definitely, the endpoint was great. But it was only a very small, trial. 86 patients were there. 86. And as such, the disease is also very rare. I think in my clinical practice of 15 years, I have seen only 1 or 2 patients.
I'm sure
I have seen many patients.
Yeah, I'm sure. This is a kind of a serositis, basically. Serositis, when it involves the pericardium, then it's got pericardium, but it could be sort of a disaster because it comes and goes. A patient is complaining of pain, shortness of breath, and for cardiologists, it could be a nightmare. I'm sure that this drug would probably show some pathway. The only question remains that at what point, like you start the patient on NSAID, then give colchicine, then also you start concomitant steroid and continuous steroid for a longer period of time. At what point you introduce this medicine?
So in this trial, they have used this medicine only once the patient responded earlier, and then they had recurrent pericarditis.
Oh, so second time.
So it's not a kind of first line of therapy. First line of therapy still remains NSAIDs and colchicine. But if the patient has recurrence, I think better to start early, after first or second recurrence.
So when the patient gets it for the second time, again you have to reintroduce NSAID as well as colchicine and steroid, or no? You start with this.
I think then steroid and this drug could be a better
option.
And then you take out the finally drop the steroid and continue with this drug.
But as you said, I think as Dr. Kumar said very rightly that the patient number is small because we do not get such type of patients in a big number. But even the small number in any cardiologist practice could be a nightmare for the physician as well as for the patient. So we need some solution. Probably this new drug called rilonacept may also be a kind of a new new therapeutic agent for such a little nagging condition, bothering condition like recurrent pericarditis. What would be your take-home message for our viewers on this drug?
So I think it's still in infancy stage, and it's a very small trial, and patients numbers are also very less. So still we have to go with the recommended NSAIDs, colchicine and steroids, and maybe in future the guidelines, once large number of trials, randomized control trials come in, then, but it's a very thought generating.
Excellent. It's very thought provoking, a very innovative kind of a trial. But I'm sure there may be simultaneous measurement of interleukin 1 before and after the treatment would be extremely helpful. That would clear the concept of interleukin 1 inhibitor, because this is an established interleukin 1 inhibitor. But how does it play in recurrent pericarditis? Physician may be interested to know about it. Thank you very much. I think we had a wonderful session having 3 new trials, and I'm sure the viewers of this program would find it extremely helpful for their own clinical practice and to enhance their cardiovascular knowledge. Please continue to see our program, Medica CardioTalks, and I'm sure that myself, I'm Dr. Ravin Chakraborty, my colleague Dr. Dilip Kumar, and all of our colleagues from cardiology and cardiothoracic surgical department are there to educate people, to educate ourselves, to educate our viewers, and so also to enhance our clinical practice so that our patients can the best form of treatment from the cardiologist worldwide. Thank you very much.